Revenge of the Black Cloak Society. A King's Quest-based fic. Interlude 3. Big Day in Jitters. Princess Yvette of Kalima paced around the room. She was worried about the next day and ignoring how amazing the room was. It wasn't every person in the world that could say they stayed in the Fairy King's castle. She couldn't even be wowed by the sight of what she could see from the window. Too much about the next day was important and could go wrong. Of course, she knew that the next day was most important to her cousin Rosella. The Princess of Daventry was going to wed the Prince of the Fairies, Edgar. It was already exciting, but it was more so because she was asked to be maid of honor. It was why Yvette was worried. She didn't want to look bad for her cousin. On the other hand, with everything that had been happening lately, she started to wonder if something she did embarrassing was the worst thing. 3 of her cousin's family's foes had come back for revenge. She had even been used as a part of that plan. That part unnerved her the most. It ended up for the best, since Rosella had come to the rescue. After that, she found out about what happened to her cousin Alexander. What made the whole thing worse was the link in common between those attacks. Both were done by someone her cousin's family had stopped. She knew that someone here was linked to someone her cousin defeated. If the past few incidents told her anything, she had a feeling another attack was coming. She needed to calm down, and maybe the best way to do that was to talk to her cousin about it. Yvette left her room and headed down the hallway in the castle. Again, she took no notice of the beauty in there. While she did take it in on her arrival, her worries kept her from enjoying the beauty now. As it was, she just made her way to the room Rosella was using and gently knocked on the door. It was done in a specific pattern that her cousin had picked out. That was so the bridal party would be let in right away, instead of having to ask her who it was. In a few seconds, Yvette saw Rosella open the door, and for a brief moment she saw a bit of concern on Rosella's face. "Yvette, what's wrong? Don't tell me your dress won't fit now." Yvette shook her head as she entered. "No, cousin, it's not that. I think we can safely say I won't be changing in figure for a while." Once she was in the room, she turned to face Rosella as her cousin closed the door. She figured it would be best to get directly to the issue. "Rosella, I've been worrying about all the attacks that has happened to your family. While I was drawn into the one, they've all been targeting your family. With the wedding tomorrow, what's to say that none of them will attack on the big day itself?" She was a bit relieved when Rosella put a hand on her shoulder. "I don't think anything like that will happen. Both of the individuals who are linked to both Edgar and I are in no way able to do anything. Militia was referred to a baby, and if I recall right, is only a toddler now, and Lolat was literally destroyed by Cupid's love arrow." Yvette did have to admit that she felt a little better after hearing that. She let out a breath that she had been holding, and then thought about what was said. Both of them had been linked to both Rosella and Edgar. She thought back to the stories of her cousin's adventures, and remembered how Rosella had met Edgar. "That's right. You met Edgar when you first went to Tamir. Was that at the time you defeated Lolat?" When her cousin shook her head, she felt puzzled. She got her answer when Rosella explained what happened. Lolat had control over most of Tamir, and she had abducted Edgar and transformed him into a being that she claimed was her son. He had developed a crush on me then, and when she was defeated, Genesta returned him to normal. Yvette wanted to ask if that had been the point where Rosella had known, but before she could ask, they both heard a knocking at the door. The knock wasn't the special one that Rosella had set up as a signal, so they both looked at one another. They weren't expecting any of the other bridal party members. In that moment, all the fears came back to Yvette. Was something going to happen tonight? Was the castle a secure enough place? After what seemed like an eternity, Rosella finally walked over to the door and opened it a little. From where she stood, Yvette could see a little boy standing there, holding a locket. At that moment, she felt her fears go away. All it had been was someone delivering something for Rosella to wear. There had been a few deliveries like that had come in since Rosella had arrived, so Yvette didn't feel worried. Still, if she wasn't worried, why was there still the concern in her head about something bad happening? Shadrach waited at the door, having used his magic to disguise himself. He had been paying attention to what had been going on, and had seen many people drop off things for the princess to wear at the wedding. It was the perfect way for him to get the locket to her. He just had to make sure she didn't recognize it. As she looked at it, Shadrach said in his best disguised voice, "This is from Edgar's family. It is a family heirloom, and was last worn by one of those that Lolotte had killed. It would be an honor for the one who vanquished her to wear it at the wedding." After what felt like an eternity, he saw Princess Rosella smile and take the locket. As she did, he heard her say, "I'd be honored to wear it at the wedding." He watched her look at it, almost as if she were studying it. That didn't worry him, since its true purpose was something no one would be able to see. He then watched as the door closed, and for a moment he heard the two girls in the room talking about the beauty of the locket. The next phase of his plan was now underway. Once Rosella put the locket on, Lolotte's spirit would begin possessing her. Now he had to make sure no one noticed what he had done. His first step was to step into an alcove and cast the spell to change back. He had been lucky to find the spot because it was one of the few places in the palace where the type of magic he used would not be detected. From that point on, he could just use the excuse of being out on a walk. It was partially true. Walking, however, served a secondary purpose. He had to gauge how things were in a security sense. While normal mortals were one matter, the fairy court was a whole different matter. He would have to be careful of extra magical means, especially when he enacted Phase 7 of his plan. He would just need to find the person for that part of the plan. It would be easy, since they had been turned into a child. No doubt it would be in the rooms closest to the royal bedroom. They were raising Militia as if she were their own, and not the Queen's sister. It would be tricky getting in there, but he would be able to do it. All he would need would be the proper distraction, as well as any information about defenses. No doubt he knew where to find that information out, if he didn't think he could sneak about the castle without arousing suspicion. Given that he had come here with the royal family of Daventry, he did have some freedom to move about. Still, he figured he didn't have the right to go anywhere near the bedroom of the King and Queen of Eldritch. He would need to figure a way to sneak in there. He paused for a moment when he heard a familiar voice say, "That does cover the matter. We still need to figure out how to reveal non-magical disguises." It was the voice of King Graham, and from what he just heard, Shadrach figured the ruler of Daventry was determined to prevent anything bad happening tomorrow. He almost wanted to laugh out loud at that, but he didn't. They were unaware he was even nearby in his guise. Still, a part of him lingered for a moment. It might do him some good to hear some of the measures they put in place. It was possible that one of those could help him with his other objective while in the castle. He just would have to remain wary of any guards that might pass by. Of course, if they did spot him, he could just say he was waiting to speak to King Graham about something. They all still thought he was Cale Silver, the new historian of Daventry. King Graham stood up after leaning over the table for so long. He, Oberon, Alexander, and a few others had been figuring out how to make sure nothing would happen at the wedding. So far, Shadrach had managed to bring back 3 threats that his family had faced over the years. Graham wasn't about to let it happen again, especially on his daughter's wedding day. He pointed at the unrolled scroll, which bore a drawing of an old, evil wizard, and said, "Given how much magic is in your kingdom, Oberon, we have to accept that Shadrach may try to use non-magical means to disguise himself." For the first time since they had begun this talk, he noticed that Oberon had shuddered a bit when he said the evil wizard's name. It actually caught him off guard that it happened. He looked over at his daughter's future in-law and said, "I'm sorry. Is there something about that name?" He watched as Oberon nodded, and also stood up straight. "I'm sorry, Graham. We have been at odds with the Black Cloak Society for longer than you have. It had gotten to the point where we had to invoke special barriers to keep their ilk out. Unfortunately, they managed to allure 2 of our folk to their side." Graham had recalled the stories his daughter and wife had told. Both of them had faced off against Militia, and Rosella had faced off against Lolotte before that. He thought it was almost ironic that they were now going to celebrate a union the evil fairy tried to force into existence. Alexander broke the silence when he asked a very important question. "Sire, how was that even possible? Wouldn't nobles like yourselves be immune to that kind of dark power?" Graham had understood what his son was asking, since he wondered the same thing from time to time. He had heard of the occasional evil fairy, but mostly they had been good beings. To his surprise, Queen Titania entered the room and responded, "It has been known to happen from time to time. Usually it happens when a fairy has the seeds of darkness in them. It got real bad with Lolotte, since she was the only one to ever kill and enjoy it. It was why she was banished in the first place, after we thought we had weakened her." Graham now had a better understanding on how it happened. Once the fairy had been banished, the Black Cloak Society had somehow recruited her. Still, he now had one question about Lolotte. He looked at Queen Titania and asked, "I'm sorry for prying on this, but what had she done to earn banishment?" He watched as the queen looked away for a moment. It was obvious that whatever Lolotte had done, it pained her to talk about. After a moment he heard her answer. "Lolotte had killed her one sister, and when she was banished, tried to kill her other sister." He then saw her look straight at him. "You see, when a fairy kills another, they take all their powers. The process also twists the mind of the fairy, since the powers are not given willingly." After hearing that, King Graham started to have a bad feeling in his gut. He had heard that Rosella had killed Lolotte using Cupid's arrow. Since Lolotte had become, or had always been, devoid of love, it was a lethal poison to her. She had just disappeared from existence, her dark powers with her. Still, Dahlia had been brought back from the dead. Had Lolotte had a method to preserve herself? Were her minions even still about? He shuddered for a moment, and then went back to the scroll. As he did, he said, "Maybe we should make sure all the guards have something like those arrows on them. Shadrach had already brought one person back from the dead. I have a strange feeling he's going to do it again." As he started to figure out whom such weapons should go to, he heard King Oberon respond to the statement. "How could he? The fairies aren't like humans. Our existence is magical, not spiritual. Humans have spirits that can haunt a location or get bound to something. Once a fairy is dead, they are gone." Graham hoped Oberon was right, but deep down, Graham had a feeling that Lolat had managed to do that very impossible feat. Rosella had just let Yvette out to head back to her room. The wedding was hours away now, and Rosella needed to get some rest. She went over to the vanity in the room to put everything down that she planned to wear tomorrow. The last thing she had was the locket, which she only got tonight. Looking it over, something in her seemed to recognize it, but she could not recall where. It looked lovely, however, and for a moment she decided to try it on. Even though she was in her night attire, the locket's beauty seemed to fit and make her feel completely dressed. It was even so lightweight, she felt she wouldn't have to remove it at all. It was the perfect accessory for the wedding. She took a moment to admire herself in the mirror again. She was a true image of beauty. She sighed happily. "It does look good on me. I just wish I could remember where I saw it before." She closed her eyes, trying to visualize where she had seen the locket before. She was sure it was on a woman she had met. It had to be a fairy as well. In her mind, she figured out who it belonged to. It had to be from Genesta, and had been given to her after that fairy had passed. It was a beautiful gift from one of the most beautiful fairies she had ever met. She froze, however, when she heard a voice behind her answer the question she thought she had already answered. "It had been mine after I claimed it from my sister." Rosella felt frozen in place. She couldn't have heard the voice of Lolat. That evil fairy was dead. Then she heard it again. "Hello again, Rosella. We have some unfinished business." Rosella quickly opened her eyes and saw the evil fairy standing behind her in the mirror. She spun around and tried to back away. She also shook her head as she did. "You can't be here. I had gotten rid of you, and Edgar said you were gone." She froze again when she backed into a wall. Part of her tried to pinch herself, hoping she had fallen asleep and was having a nightmare. Given the wedding and the events recently happening to her family, this had to be a nightmare. She had destroyed Lolat and saved Tamir. To her horror, she felt herself being pulled towards Lolat. As that happened, she managed to grab a brush on the vanity. She would have to act quickly, however, since she was sure Lolat was already using dark magic to control her. As she got closer to her foe, the evil fairy spoke. "Silly mortal, the members of the Black Cloak Society know ways of cheating death. I put a part of my essence in that locket, something Shadrach was aware of. Now I will have another chance at destroying you, as well as Genesta. and even eldritch. Rosella took that moment to throw the hairbrush. She hoped it would connect, allowing her a chance to escape the room. You won't get that chance, Lolot. The power of love destroyed you once, and it will do so again. She watched as the brush flew through the air, right at Lolot's face. She knew it would be enough to break whatever hold the evil fairy had. To her surprise, unfortunately, it connected, but Lolot didn't move. When it hit, she felt her own head snap back, as if she had just hit herself in the face with the brush. She then went falling backwards, and only an unseen force stopped her. She also felt her arms get pinned to her sides as that happened. What made it worse, however, was the fact that Lolot was now laughing at her. As she started to struggle, hoping to get free, she saw Lolot standing over her now. "Foolish girl, you aren't fighting me in the waking world. The second you put the locket on, after that other foolish girl left, I made my move in your mind. You are my prisoner until I no longer need you. First, I'll make sure your wedding happens and restore Edgar to his submissive self. Once that is done, we will get Pandora's box and use it to destroy the realm of Eldritch. What makes this better is that most people will blame you." Again, Lolot laughed, and Rosella looked on in horror. Rosella had always been able to avoid tough spots, but the worst had been when she could do nothing and had to rely on help from someone else. Someone she wasn't sure would come, or who it would be. This was worse, however, since she was certain that no one would know until it was too late. No one would know that she was now a prisoner in her own mind. Then a spark of hope hit her. She did have one chance, but she had to find it. Lolot's control over her body could not be complete. There had to be some way for her to get a message out, and it would be in the dream world. The trick, however, would be finding a way through, and once that was done, connecting to the right person. She just needed to do it at the right time, and she had a bad feeling it would not be now. She would just have to try once she regained some mental strength. She just hoped Lolot would tip her hand a bit too soon.